Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. It's nice to see people in person. I was afraid that we would be all digital and I was going to be speaking to an empty room, so it's good to see all of you. It is true, in fact, today I am going to talk to you about something called strategic design. But first, I would like to tell you a story, if that's okay. So something very interesting has emerged around the world. That every time people put down these paths and say like, hey, people, this is where you should go, there are these other paths that show up. If you can see this one here in the middle. And it's happening all over the place. This is, I think, in England somewhere. And it happens in like suburban parks. And it happens in cities. I think this is Toronto. And it's happened historically. We know this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Happens in the winter. Really easy to notice in the winter. It even shows up in cartoons. This is Monsters, Inc. or Monsters University. And look, you can see one of these little paths here. Here's another example. And people have given these paths a name. I don't know if anyone's familiar with these, but the name for these paths is desire paths. And desire paths let us see where there's a tension between what we have created for people and what people want for themselves. In other words, it is an act of design. This is a literal, tangible expression of people's innate desire to design. And so you might be saying right now, like, well, this is not how I think of design. I think that design is graphic design, or maybe making websites, or maybe architecture is design, or something like that is design. But these desire paths, I would offer up to you as an act of design. And so you might say, by what definition is this design? And I would give you this one. Herb Simon, CMU's own Nobel Prize winner, has written many wonderful books on decision-making, behavior, says this: everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. And isn't that why we are all here, particularly participating in a venture competition? We have an idea for something that is going to change an existing situation into something better. It would be better if we could spec materials like this, right? That is design. And so this definition of design simplifies it for me, right? Because it really breaks design down into two core components. An existing situation. So I have to know about an existing situation, and I have to be able to speak to a preferred alternative. That's pretty easy, right? Every one of us probably at some point in our day has said, gosh, I would be able to get to the bus quicker if I just set my alarm 5 minutes earlier, right? So that's an acknowledgement of the existing situation. I'm late to the bus every day, and a preferred situation that I would like to get to. It's an act of design. And so how do we apply this definition of design to the work that we're about to do? We need really to think about two things. What is presently happening, the existing situation, and what could be, what the possibilities are for the future. And so now we'll get into a little bit more of a detailed graphic that looks like this. This is called the analysis synthesis bridge model, which is a very fancy name for this model of design, which is one I prefer to use. And this is the one I think about when I'm thinking about a design process. The things to know about this model are that it has an x-axis that runs from activities of knowing, so like knowledge-y type stuff, thinking activities, to activities of making. And it has a y-axis that runs from concrete, like real, tangible stuff, to abstract. Like stuff that maybe in our heads might be a little fuzzier, might be harder to name, harder to place, right? Those are the kind of core dimensions of this diagram. Each of these quadrants represents a phase of design. And I'm going to walk us through those quadrants now. So the first quadrant down here requires us to understand what is. This is where we do activities that are mostly knowledge focused and fairly concrete. We're trying to get a deep, deep understanding of the current state of things. Now, if it's like Megan's morning routine, Megan is an expert in her routine, and so there's not a lot of activities that she would have to do to understand that deeply. But if it's something like mom's relationship with the grocery store, I'm not a mom, there's going to be things that I need to do in order to know that, right? In order to know that quadrant, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are in a minute. So, one, we have to understand what is. Next, we have to be able to deconstruct what is, to analyze what is, to take apart what is, to look at it from different angles, right? So we have to be able to look at the current state in a number of different ways. This is where we're still doing kind of knowledge activities, but it may be a little bit more abstract, right? We might be making models, we might be drawing pictures, we might be expressing ourselves in ways that aren't necessarily concrete. Now, how do we cross over here to this other side? The next thing that we do, we move this way, is we begin to explore what could be. We explore what could be by doing activities that may be characterized as making things, but they're still abstract things, right? They may be models, they may be sketches, but they're not finished products. They're not final stuff yet. And finally, we make what could be. These are our most concrete activities of making, like prototyping and things like that. And remember, I said we need to know two things. We need to know something about the existing situation, and we need to understand the preferred alternatives in order to design. And so when we look at this model, this side of the house deals with the existing situation. And this side of the house deals with the preferred alternatives. So what is and what could be. So that's the sort of foundation that I want to set in this room for us before we go on to talk about what we actually do at each phase of this model. Any questions before I go on about analysis, synthesis, bridge diagram, who is a designer, who gets to design, etc.? Anything online else? Go ahead.
What is the difference between understanding what it is and deconstructing it?
We'll get into that in just a minute, right? What is the question is, what is the difference between understanding and deconstructing, right? Understanding is about being able to articulate it as it is today, very clearly, concisely, and accurately. I can describe the situation correctly, fully. Deconstructing it is I can take it apart, I can model it, I can look at it from this angle, from that angle, right? And so they are two sides of the same coin. We have to be able to do both. Question?
Yes. When we talk about understanding, are we like breaking down the problem, which is present in it, and trying to understand, okay, these are the key areas which are like, having something, having some gap. And when we talk about deconstructing, it is like identifying within these gaps that how we can like look for further alternatives. Is it like that?
I think that's fair. That is one way that someone may approach this. We may not need to do a gap analysis, so that may not necessarily be the function of why we are designing. But if that is the goal for us, then it is true that we might do those types of activities here. All right, I'm gonna teach you a secret handshake now. Okay, so get ready. This phrase, how might we, is something that will unlock the door to you in any room that is filled with designers. And here's why. This is a very specific way that we ask each other questions. We don't say, well, how do we do that? Or we have to figure this problem out, or what's going on here, right? We don't ask questions that way. We say, how might we? And we do this very purposefully. How implies that we don't know the answer yet, right? That when we're trying to answer a question, we're trying to solve a problem, we don't know the answer. Might means that there is not one right solution. There may be many correct solutions. There are many possibilities to solving a hard and complex problem. We means we do it together. We need a diverse group of thinkers, actors, doers to work together in order to solve a problem. It doesn't come from any one person, one skill set, one background. And so you'll see this phrase a lot in the design world when you're doing design thinking activities, and it's a very specific phrase that now you know means very specific things. And if you want to get a designer to work with you on your team and you just say, how might we? That's a good way to lure them in, right? How might we? So I'm gonna walk through each phase and I'm gonna talk through a few things, tactical things that you can do at each phase in order to kind of answer the main question inside of each phase. So the first, how might we, that I'm going to offer up to you is, how might we understand what is? So we had this question like, what's the difference between understanding and deconstructing? So let me share a few options for you when you're trying to understand what is, when you're trying to understand the current state. You can make observations. Observing is probably the least invasive way that you can deeply understand the current state of things, particularly if you're not the target audience for whatever the thing you're designing for, creating for is, right? If I'm really, really interested in understanding the way mechanics use their tools, right? I'm not a mechanic, I can't observe myself. I can go somewhere where there are mechanics working, where they are using their tools, and I can observe. I can make myself a series of things I'm looking for. I can have a notepad. I can sit back, be non-obstructive, don't get in their way, I don't need to talk to them, and I can make observations. It's one way of understanding what is. Another way of understanding what is something called immersion. I can deeply immerse myself in the process. I can go into the place where the tools are being used. I can learn how to use them. I can try some things, right? I can get as deep as I can. Sometimes we're dealing with things that we have access to, right? Like grocery shopping or going to this type of store, getting our car serviced, right? I can do those activities, but with the lens on, like I am doing this in order to understand what is. I'm not just going to do it blindly, but I'm going to be really present, thoughtful, think about what's going on. I probably have a plan for what I'm going to be looking for, what feelings I'm having, what emotions, etc. Right? So that's immersion. And then finally, I can do something called contextual inquiry. Contextual inquiry is a method that we use when we are interested in doing sort of two things at once, right? When we're interested in doing observation, we're kind of interested in immersion, but we're also interested in talking to people. And contextual inquiry is when we literally go, like in this case, right? This woman is visiting a construction site. She's got a hard hat on, and she's literally talking to someone in the context of the problem about what's going on, right? So it might look like showing up to the site. It might look like doing a little observation. It might look like, interrupting someone and saying, hey, this all looks really great. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about what you're doing? Can you talk to me aloud while you fix that beam or do whatever it is that you're doing, right? So this is contextual inquiry. I should mention there are myriad methods. You can buy books and workbooks, and there's different publications, 500 design methods. the 20 design methods you need to know, right? These are only 3 of many, and there's lots of different combinations of these, but these are 3 that I would say are the ones that I would use if I were trying to get started, right? Observation, immersion, and contextual inquiry. So next, let's look at the next quadrant. What might we do if we are trying to deconstruct what is? I've been immersed in the space. I think I have a deep understanding of the current state. Now, how can I take it apart? How do I do that? How might we deconstruct what is? The first activity that I would offer up to you is something called stakeholder mapping. Stakeholder mapping is a tactic that we use where we are literally trying to create the most exhaustive map of all of the stakeholders in a system, how they are connected, why they are connected, what they want from each other, how value flows around the system, et cetera, right? We can't do stakeholder mapping unless we deeply understand the system, right? We need that first step. We need that immersion and observation and question asking in order to do this. But this is a way that we can then translate that knowledge into a deconstruction, right? So we're really taking it apart. And then certainly, like our friend in the back pointed out to us, we might look at the map and say, there's an area right here on the map that needs some attention, right? I wonder why this group isn't talking to this group. That's a problem, right? And it may become the foundation for some future design activities. We can also do things like create experience maps, journey maps. You may hear this, service design blueprints. These are all documents. They're long, long, long documents. Sometimes companies will make them and they're like the length of a whole room, right? These are all ways of documenting a human's journey or experience over time. And there are lots of different variables that you can place on those maps, but essentially what you're trying to say is, here are kind of the phases of the experience. Here's what's happening at each phase of the experience. Here's what people are doing. Here's how they feel. Here's how they think. Here are some of the components that they're interacting with, et cetera. Okay. And then you can do another activity that we call affinity clustering. I'm sure you have seen these boards in various whiteboards over campus where people have lots of different Post-it notes and they're circled and they have a title. This is just a way of taking knowledge that we have like kind of scribbled out on sticky notes and putting like with like, right? So we can have everyone kind of get the ideas out of their head, all the things that they're thinking, feeling, notice during these observation sessions or these immersion sessions, right? Write them down on sticky notes, put them up on the wall, and begin to cluster them together. And as these clusters form, you can give these clusters a name, right? And then when you stand back and you look at your wall, you start to see groups of information, topics of information. That's a deconstruction of all the knowledge and a reconstruction in some ways of all the knowledge that the individual people in the team have gained and have put together in an interesting way. 3 ways to deconstruct what is. Like I said, there are many, many more, but these 3 are good to get started with. Next up is how might we explore what could be? So now we've made the switch into the world of beginning to think about preferred alternatives, right? Probably those deconstruction activities have exposed to us some possibilities. And now we're switching over and starting to say, let's explore some of those options. How do we do this? Well, there are a couple of ways. One that I would offer up to you is the creative matrix activity. This is an activity where we create a statement starter, so a how might be question. And we have a long list of enablers. Enablers are really just categories of ideation, like technology and digital media, or people and places, something like that. We brainstorm at the intersection of a question and an enabler. And so the ideas that come up in that square are constrained a little bit, right? It helps us to brainstorm because it means we're not just open-ended brainstorming all the possibilities all the time. That constraint allows us to focus our thinking. And if we have enough of those focused areas of thinking, then by the time we're done with that session, we have lots and lots and lots of good ideas on the board. Creative matrix is a great way to create lots and lots and lots of ideas fairly quickly, you know, in a half an hour. Another activity that we can do is something called storyboarding. Storyboarding is obviously something that's been borrowed from movies and cartoons, where we're literally looking at a situation and we create some frames for ourselves. And in those frames, we sketch out some different ideas, and we can put those storyboards in front of people and we can say like, hey, here's a possible future. What do you think about this? Right? Here's one way that this new app that I'm working on could work. Here's a different way you might be able to order materials. Let's walk through this step by step. Give me your thoughts, right? Another way that we can explore what could be is to create something called a concept poster, where we're literally trying to articulate our idea almost like an advertisement, right? All on one place, all in one page, that again, we could hang up, we can stand back, we can look at them, we could have 5 or 6 concepts, we can vote on them, we can show them to people, we can get feedback on them, right? We're still in this abstract world, but we're beginning to make things. We're beginning to sort of construct possibilities, right? They're fuzzy, but they look a little bit more like what could be. And then finally, when we get back around to this last quadrant, how do we make what could be? What are activities that we can actually use to create the idea, to construct the idea? The most basic thing that we can do is to sketch or even to make wireframes, right? We can literally draw a picture of the idea. We can do something called paper prototyping, which I would offer up to you as something that is very important and that is often missed, considering how easy it is to prototype things digitally today. But paper prototyping is a way to create a prototype that literally, if you notice here, this is an image from our friends at the Luma Institute. If you notice here, this person is like literally the button to click is like a separate piece of paper, and so they're going to move it onto the screen. You can literally play with things this way and have people engage with them. And the really nice thing about creating a paper prototype is that it's not so formal and official that people think, oh, this is a finished product. I have to be like nice to this person. They obviously spent a ton of time in this, right? When it's this level, this kind of level of quality, people understand that it is something that's still in flux. We're still working with it, right? And the feedback may be more useful to you for something like this. And then finally, we can do pilots and experiments and experience prototyping. This is an example that I pulled in that I love this story from IDEO, where they created something for, I think it was Mass Mutual, called the Society of Grown-Ups. It was a retail storefront that was intended to be a place where millennials could go and get advice about like adulting topics, right? Financial advice, etc. And it was a really cool experience. But to get to that brick and mortar storefront that was in the built environment in a town on their main street, they started by creating just a little like white box room and holding some of the sessions in that space that they intended to have in that storefront, right? So it's a prototype, but it's a prototype of an experience, or maybe we could call it a little bit of like a pilot or an experiment, and then they could understand what the space was going to be like, how people were going to feel in the space, how they might move through the space without fully designing the whole experience, right? And investing the time and resources in that. So a question that people often ask me when we get to this point in the conversation is, what about interviewing? Where does interviewing fall? And what I would say is that interviewing is not a technique that is appropriate for one of these quadrants. Interviewing, talking to human beings, is something that we should be doing all around the board. So when we're trying to understand what is, we should be having conversations with people, right? If I'm observing or I'm immersing myself in an environment, I might walk over and ask someone a question. If I'm doing contextual inquiry, interviewing is a component of that activity. When I'm trying to deconstruct what is, I'm making models and I might be putting them back in front of people. I'm making pictures of things and I might be going to either the real experts, the humans that I'm designing for, or analogous people, right? People who know a lot about those people. And I'm going back to them and I'm saying, does this make sense? Is the way that I'm articulating this accurate? Are these connections right that I'm making? Right? It isn't I make the map and I'm done kind of activity. It's something that is iterative, that I'm always talking to people about. When I'm exploring what could be, there are lots of different methods. One of them that comes to mind is speed dating, right? That people will use to put storyboards in front of folks and have them kind of quickly run through them and get their feedback on them, right? See which are the preferred alternatives. So again, I'm interviewing people, I'm talking to people about the things that I'm making, that I'm creating. And then finally, when I'm down here in the world of actually making real things, right? I want to put them in front of people. I want to see them using them, but it's not enough to just see them use them. I want to talk to them about what's going on for them when they're using them. I'm asking questions. I'm trying to go more deeply on those things. Any questions about the 4 phases and how we typically kind of move through those phases?
I'm curious about the paper prototyping.
Yeah.
And how common that still is in industry, because I know a lot of people just use big.
Skip right over it. You know, I would say that does happen, you know, that is what is happening. I would encourage us to continue to do that. It becomes such a nice, lightweight way of mocking up a system or an idea that doesn't require us to be in front of a computer. And you can create a paper prototype for something like right on the fly in an interview if you need to. And if we don't build that muscle, like, oh, I can do this quickly, right? To have that kind of confidence to do that, we won't have that method like in our pocket when the time presents itself to do it. So I would say it is becoming less common, as you've noticed, but it shouldn't be less common. It's a very valuable method. Go ahead.
Are there recommendations you have, either how large of a group to do this with, or how diverse, maybe in terms of functions represented?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are lots of different standards for sort of how we do human-centered design. The one that I look to often is actually an ISO standard. And so it tells us that we should have a multidisciplinary group of people working on the design problem, right? And so it's not that there's a certain number. I think when we have a design team that gets larger than 5 or 6 people, maybe it starts to get a little unwieldy. But what is important on that design team is that we have different kinds of people represented, even if we're talking about backgrounds, experience, diversity of thought represented there, right? So it's nice to have a mix of engineers and traditional designers and people like myself who are researchers working together to solve a problem. Other questions about the process? There was another hand here. Maybe I answered it.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. A diverse group, as diverse as we can get in terms of kind of background, outlook, etc., will kind of help us get as deep as we can into these knowing spaces, right? Because we really do want to be able to take it apart. Go ahead.
So, when we're deconstructing, understanding, and exploring, we often start thinking about solutions. And, at what stage should we start constraining ourselves with, okay, this is viable, this can make the business out of it, okay, we can construct it, these are the materials, these are the ways, these are not feasible.
Yeah.
So at what stage do we, start restricting ourselves?
Yeah, it becomes a tricky question when we sort of say like, no solutions yet, right? Versus like solutions welcome. I tend to think that this process is a spiral, right? That we are sort of moving around this map like this instead of like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So it's okay to, if as we're understanding what is, things bubble up and we kind of write them down and put them to the side and get them out of our heads. What we don't want to be doing is jumping from understanding what is to making what could be. Because the goal is to get into this deconstruction and exploration before we land on our kind of, this is what will solve it, right? The other thing to remember is that when we start making things, that becomes the next what is, right? Once we've made something, it's real, it's in the world, now it exists. Now we're talking to people about it as though it exists, right? And we sort of start the process over again. Right, and so that's why you kind of move this way as a spiral. If I create the ultimate app for doing this thing and I show people how to use it, now I'm sort of starting to understand it through this lens, right? Because it's a real thing. It's able to be used. Other questions about this model?
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh, we're coming for you, Jordan.
Jordan, can you speak?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I think they've just raised their hand.
He's typing the question.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't realize it was going to pop up over there. Sorry. How often should you go through this process and how do you know when to start over again? What a good question. This is one of those, like, unfortunately, it depends sort of questions, right? Each phase is not probably going to be the same amount of time. So what this diagram might be hiding a little bit is that you may spend lots and lots of time here and a smaller amount of time here, and then lots and lots of time here and a small amount of time here, right? Or maybe you spend not that much time here, but a lot of time trying to take it apart, right? We know it pretty well, but this is the hard part. And then you move over here and you spend not that much time here, but it's really hard to make this thing. And so we spend lots of time here, right? So the fact that the squares are equal size in this diagram may be masking the fact that the amount of time you spend in each phase may be different. How many times should we go through this process is a really, really difficult question. And the answer is until you know what you should be doing, until you kind of feel it truly in your gut that this is the right thing to do. You may have data to support that. It may not just be like all things that are coming to you from the universe, right? You may have real data from pilots that you've run that point you to this or that solution. You may have actual data at any point in this process that kind of help you make a decision. But but you kind of do it until you feel like you've got the right thing. Right? There are many products and services that are out in the world that are real, that have users and customers and people using them, and they're still making adjustments and tweaks to them. And so this process can happen even if what could be becomes what is, right? Other questions about any of the methods that we talked about in here? It's always difficult to know who has had experience with what and what things we've done a lot of or a little bit of. Yes. How effective are surveys? That is a good question. Surveys are very effective when you are trying to understand the literal statistics associated with large groups of people answering questions, right? When we want to understand hey, I have a big sample size. I want to try to understand the breakdown. Surveys become more and more useful when they are representative of the population that we are trying to understand. Surveys become challenging when I see a lot of students doing surveys on, 5, 10, 15 people, deploying a survey and getting very small numbers. And those of us in the room who understand something about math understand that that's fine, it's directional. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what if our survey just landed on 5 unique people, right? That aren't really expressing the kind of opinions of the majority in any sort of meaningful way, right? We send the survey out, 10 people respond, and they all love our product. Yay, great. We're high-fiving and giving ourselves pat on the back. We could have just stumbled upon 10 unique people that have different opinions from everyone else, right? And if we would have sent that survey out to 400 people, right, those 10 might have been the only 10 that liked the product. Right. And so that's the challenge with survey data, is that when we aren't being really conscientious about the actual numbers and our sample sizes and what that means, it can give us a false sense of truth, security, and what we're trying to do. Now, if we're using those small survey numbers just to get some directional feedback, I just want to get a pulse on things. Not hanging my hat on this. It's not like I'm not carving this into a stone tablet. I just want to get a pulse on some things that's just directional. It's fine if it helps, but it's that when we have the numbers is when surveys really become valuable in terms of feedback. The other challenge with surveys is we can never really go back and ask people why, right? And so I find it more valuable in the work that I do. I find it more valuable to pair the survey information, so getting some survey data, okay, we kind of have a sense, we think these are the challenges, with some qualitative conversations that I can have with people where I can ask those why questions. So I understand that this population of people has these challenges because I looked at the survey data, but now I'm going to go try to see if I can figure out why, more deeply understand what is. It's not enough to just know this thing is great or this thing is not great. But why? In what situation? How did we get to the place where people are saying this, right? Those are all very valuable pieces of info. Other questions? Where are people all participating in the venture competition in this room, in the McGinnis competition? Who is participating? Do you have your ideas? Are you you already know what you're doing? So you're somewhere on this map. Are you here? Some of us are way over here, right? In the how are we gonna do it kind of thing. Okay, awesome. Well, I'm gonna give you a little gift now. Whoops, I have to do it this way. Oh, it took the clicker away. There we go. There. So a friend of mine, collaborator that I work with a lot, Adam Pulisic, some of us may know him, right? He's a friend of the center. He created Miro templates. This is just a sampling of them. There are many, many more. I'll put up a QR code at the end that takes you to a larger, or the kind of the whole group. He created these templates. You'll see a familiar face in some of the videos talking about how to use these templates. These are all available to you on Miro. Miro, show of hands, how many of us know how to use Miro? Awesome, great. So you know where Miro is, you know what to do with it, but these are all templates that you can use to at various stages of that process, from understanding what is to what could be. There are lots of things on here that I didn't talk about today. Each of the templates has associated with it a video and some how-to instructions. So hopefully that's enough information for you. But if it is not enough information for you, you can certainly get in touch with me, others. So here's a bunch of different stuff, right? This takes you to the whole strategic design kit. Here's a link to Viv, the corporate venture builder that we talked about, Open My Consultancy. And if you want to connect on LinkedIn, I'm down here. And if you're struggling at any point of that process and you want to talk to someone, you have questions, you want to bounce them off of someone, please, of course, feel free to reach out.